6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. 7.6 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of consciousness. This is
yes, indeed. It is Science Night in the morning.
Rocking some air guitar.
Rocking some Randy Rhoads
a little Randy
air
Rhoads.
guitar, I think.
Very good.
Ozzy Osbourne. Good stuff. Thomas Shiller here in the studio with us, and we are having a great morning. It is absolutely beautiful and gorgeous out there. And let me tell you, we have a good show for you.
We do.
Yeah, and it is all about something that I have been very intrigued by because, you know, I love a good mystery. I think everybody loves a good mystery, right?
Yeah, sure.
And there is a mysterious void that is hidden within the rocks that we stand on. And that, my friends, that is time. So we're going to be talking about missing time today. And as you travel through and look at the beautiful mountains, gaze upon Mitre Peak, or even if you're heading to Big Bend right now, you see a lot of geology across the whole entire expanse of this beautiful high desert. And you also unknowingly are looking and gazing upon missing time in some ways. Yeah. And we're going to be talking about that. So tell me first off, Dr. Thomas Shiller, who is with us today, and what is missing time, Tom?
Well, it's time.
It is still time.
That's missing. It is, yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So, you know, we're talking about missing time in the context of geologic time, which we've talked about this in previous episodes, kind of the different scales of time that we're aware of as people. You know, we've got our kind of human scale of time that we're familiar with, which is our hours and minutes and days and weeks and all that. To geologist, that's like minuscule, barely, you know, a blip, you know. To physicists, to astronomers, Anirban's just joined us here. They work on an even longer time scale.
Okay.
And so when talking about missing time in a geologic context, we can be talking about millions, if not billions of years that are basically missing from our rock record. And it's pretty common. Not necessarily the big ones that are like 1.5 billion years that are missing, but even small scale missing time. If you, for example, to kind of demonstrate what a short amount of missing time would look like, if you're driving down to Big Bend or in Central Texas where you have layered rocks, you know, if you drive to Central Texas on I-10, you see all these limestones that have little layers. Mm-hmm. Technically, each one of those planes that separates those layers of limestone represents some amount of missing time. Now, probably talking, you know, maybe days or even hours of missing time, but each one of those discrete planes represents what we call a bedding surface in missing time. Now, on a broader scale, or on a longer scale, I should say, if you're, you know, walking around and looking at rocks or driving through I-10, sometimes you can see these irregular surfaces that aren't flat and planar. They're kind of jagged or wavy. Mm-hmm. Those are probably what we call unconformities, which usually represent a more substantial amount of missing time. And unconformities are kind of the standard unit or standard feature that we associate with time that's missing from the physical rock record.
Yeah.
And it's something you can visually, you can look at and you can identify. You don't need necessarily any sort of time context. Mm-hmm. In other words, you don't need fossils to tell you that an unconformity exists in some places.
Can I ask you something about basically our geology out here? The way I've described it to people is that it's like you take the oceans and the waves that are the oceans and you just pause it. And you basically transform those waves into what our geology is really out here. And you have like this moment in history where we can actually observe this one tiny little piece of the last 4.6 billion years.
Yeah, and not just one little piece. You know, that's one of the unique things about the Trans-Pecos is our geologic history goes all the way back to the Paleozoic, back when the continents were in totally different spots, when we had an ocean that existed in our current geographic location, and different animals, different plants. You have that window of time that's preserved. You have the Cretaceous. We're going to the time of the dinosaurs. We've got a good record of that here. And then finally, we have a really great record of geologic events that took place in the Cenozoic in recent time, volcanoes and stuff like that. So we're really fortunate out here in West Texas to have a pretty good record. Yeah. Now, the reason I don't say complete is because there's really no complete record, which brings up the missing time idea. Is that when we look at our geologic record, there's a huge amount of time that's missing.
Like specifically out here, what makes this area unique?
Well, probably the best known spot where you can see a substantial amount of time that's missing is in the Glass Mountains, which are just north of, just north of Alpine. And what you're seeing there, if you look off to the Glass Mountains, you can see the lower rocks that make up those, they're hills, they're not really mountains. They're sort of tilted at different angles than the ones that are on top. And there is a discrete horizon in between those two that's a very easily identified surface that represents basically all of the Triassic and Jurassic periods of the Cretaceous, or the Mesozoic, and most of the beginning of the Cretaceous that are gone. They're just not exposed.
Right.
So it's separating the Permian 251 million years ago from the Cretaceous.
So what does this create for you as a scientist? Like it sounds like you're opening a toy chest.
It creates problems is what it creates.
Problems? Well, that's like a moment to discover, right? That's all a problem is,
that's
right?
Well, that's the problem with missing time is it's missing. You don't know what happened. And
that gives you the opportunity to discover.
It gives you the opportunity to hypothesize, to be a little bit creative, because if you don't have any physical evidence of what was happening, then how are you going to figure out what happened, right?
Right.
So, when looking at that unconformity, who knows? There are ideas out there.
What are your ideas?
Well,
you have ideas, right?
Well, yeah. So when you look at that period of geologic time, and my hypothesis and probably the most widely accepted hypothesis or explored hypothesis is probably not as sexy as you would think, but it's basically has to do with plate tectonics. We talked about the position of the continents before. Mm-hmm. It's whenever we get a period where we have large supercontinents, like we did.
Pangea?
Yeah, exactly. At the end of the Permian going into the Triassic, we had Pangea. We had the supercontinent that stretched from the north to the South Pole.
Yeah.
Basically, when you have the continents coalesced like that, you have broader areas of continental interior. If we look at our modern continents, where we have the interior regions are basically places that are either sites of deposition or erosion. Mm-hmm. And then we have uplifted areas on the edge of continents where there's active plate boundaries. So where you have mountains that are being forced up and generating sediment from erosion. So if you take a continent or all of our continents and you smash them together and you create this big broad swath of interior, you basically have a prolonged period of erosion that's taking place. Mm-hmm. So those older rocks that form the kind of center of the core of the continent are being exposed from erosion. And what you end up with when all that's buried over is missing time. You get an unconformity in between them. So to me, that's the most likely explanation.
Yeah.
And that's not the only big unconformity that exists.
Will we ever like peel back this unconformity and find Atlantis?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Anirban saying yes.
Yes.
It's in my backyard. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's here in Alpine, Texas. You heard it.
Yes. That's in my backyard.
That's what you've been hiding back there.
Yes.
There we go.
In my
Not
tiny-
just bones. Okay.
No.
All right.
Just that tiny little backyard. I have Atlantis in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Atlantis is not
What
in an-
really do you think like hides these unconformities? So we're talking about missing time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. Is it only guesswork that we have to discover
no.
this? Or?
No, so like I was saying, when it comes to the missing time that we have in the Triassic and Jurassic out here, we do have clues. It's not uniform. That unconformity isn't everywhere. So we can kind of piece it together like a puzzle. It's just what was going on here is not the same thing that was going on where we actually see those rocks preserved. So you can't directly associate it, but we know through plate tectonics that we had this supercontinent.
Yeah.
And we know, generally speaking, the processes of long-term erosion and what we call denudation of a
Oh
continent.
my gosh. So you're connecting all these different pieces and
Yeah.
there's like a vast expanse of just like mysteries that are kind of connected and you got to find each piece to put it together.
And the pieces, what I was going to say is more like you're also saying just because it's missing time in the Permian Basin here, right, in Texas, it's not that, let's say you are missing 1 million years between 25 million years to 24 million years. You're completely missing that 1 million years. You might not be missing that in somewhere in Africa. You might have that. And I know it's not the same geology we are talking about. You would still have some clue that which is better than nothing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah. And that's the nature of geology as a whole is piecing together little points of evidence because
how do you as an academic compound that?
Well, it's as from the point that people started studying this sort of thing. This goes all the way back to James Hutton, one of the fathers of geology, recognizing these layers of missing time and trying to figure out what's going on. Even with our knowledge now, and this is 100 something years later, we still don't know entirely, right? At least when it comes to these large scale unconformities. And ours is pretty big. We have there's basically 2 or 3 of what we call great unconformities on Earth.
Only 2 or 3?
Great unconformities. So ones that are widespread and comprise a lot of geologic time.
When you say widespread, like what are you talking about? Like that goes
Continental,
across
across a continent. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a big one that's well exposed in Scotland. This is one that James Hutton, one of the fathers of modern geology, that he described and puzzled over back in the 1800s. And we've got one in the Grand Canyon here in North America, which separates.
How many does North America have? Like the gold medals? Like
well, that's the great one in North America. There's all sorts of unconformities in North America.
But the great one is the Grand Canyon.
In the Grand Canyon, yeah. And the reason we can study it is because the Grand Canyon incisors all the way down to these ancient Precambrian rocks. So what you have there is you've got, there's actually 2 unconformities there. There's the oldest one separates much older Precambrian rock from younger Precambrian rock.
That's 400 million years ago, right? Or like, what is
this? This actually goes back. The Vishnu group is, I think the top of the Vishnu is 1.8 billion
years ago.
I want to say. I think that's, and I'm terrible with numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's older than 1 billion years.
Okay.
And so there's an unconformity that separates the Vishnu group, which is a bunch of igneous and metamorphic rocks from the original core of the North American continent. And then that separates the Vishnu from what's called the Grand Canyon supergroup, which is still old. And then that material is all tilted up So it's tilted at a different angle from what's overlying it, which are all the nice horizontal sedimentary rocks from the Paleozoic that you see making up the lower part of the Grand Canyon. So if you look at the unconformity at the top of the Vishnu, and then subtract the time that's missing to the base of the Tepete sandstone, it's a lot of time.
Wow.
It's over 1 billion years that's missing there.
Wow. Man.
The one that Hutton described in Scotland, I think it's 80 million years that are missing.
Wow.
So not as much time, but the reason these are so impressive is because they're what we call angular unconformities. So there's missing time, but it's more apparent because the underlying rocks, the much older rocks, are at a different angle. They're tilted relative to the ones on top of them. So these angular unconformities you see, in some cases the rocks are almost vertical. And then you have this erosional surface on top of them, this irregular surface, and then horizontal rocks. This is the same deal with the one, if you drive down to Shafter.
Oh,
if you drive just south of Shafter.
Yeah.
There's a big one that you can't miss, and like the second and last road cut before you get to Presidio. And it's a big angular unconformity. You have old Cretaceous rocks that are tilted, and then you have an unconformable surface, and on top of that is much younger alluvial fan deposits from the Shinadi Mountains.
Interesting. Yeah. So we are talking about some serious mystery here, like billions of years of just like, it's like if you watch Titanic and you take like, the whole part about like him being a thief or whatever.
Yeah.
out.
I think you could trim a good hour and a half off that movie.
You
though.
think so?
Yeah.
Especially in the middle part.
Yeah, that middle part. You can take that out.
I can't even remember the middle part. I was asleep. But anyway, we have about 3 minutes left, and we're talking about missing time right now. So scientifically and academically, there are a lot of minds that speculate, right? And for the last 3 minutes, I think I'd like you to expand a little bit on how you communicate, and do you all like just with a particular like concentration of interest, like get together on this missing time?
Yeah, so
or what?
when you get your PhD, you're invited to a super secret location, and that's where they give you
with the Minerva statue.
There's a Athena statue. They give they give you a tweed jacket.
Okay.
And a pipe, a meerschaum pipe.
Sweet. Ooh.
And
nice.
And then once a year we all meet there and sit.
Is there a sword?
There, of course, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm giving too much away.
Flaming sword, probably.
No, this is, just it's the same as any other science is communicated in the literature. People publish papers and communicate that way and collaborate. Okay. And that's the whole goal of at least geologic science, is just taking these little pieces, because there's geologists everywhere.
Yeah. Taking
these little pieces and trying to fit them together somehow. And just like with anything else, there's competing hypotheses and debate.
Which is good.
Yeah. It's productive in the end.
Well, it seems like a muddled mixture, really, kind of like a mixture of ideas and
it starts out like
concepts.
That. It starts out like that, but then hypotheses are disproven. Their hypotheses are supported and become theories after more and more information is gathered. So it's just the natural process of science.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
unfortunately, people's strong opinions get intertwined with that, but that's something historically that's
personality, baby. It's all about that personality.
Even geologists have personalities.
They do.
I think so.
Oh wow!
I haven't discovered mine yet.
I mean,
sweet. No, I'm just kidding.
I do want to touch on that when we come back up after break about the little thing that you talked about. How the science, as Conley was talking about, how it's come to the consensus kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very interesting, especially when you're talking about something unknown to everybody, right?
Yeah.
And then we have this collective of ideas to try to speculate into the unknown. And now, what are we going to diagnose as fact? Right?
Yeah, and I'll touch on that when we come back after the break, a little bit about it.
All right, sounds good. We'll see you right after a quick commercial break. Ah, yes, indeed. We are back. It is the Science Nights in the morning. I have Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee with me and Dr. Thomas Shiller, resident, I would say, geologist slash paleontologist slash like Indiana Jones, basically personification in the high desert. How's that?
Yeah.
Does that sound okay?
With a mustache.
With a mustache.
Yeah.
But okay, so
And I have the whip. He doesn't have the whip.
okay, you got the whip. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. We'll give you the whip,
Yeah.
Anirban.
Is that what you have in your backyard too?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
We're learning
in
more
a
and more
locked
about it.
closet.
My backyard.
Well, we're having fun today, and it is Science Nights in the morning. We're talking about missing time, and before we had a really good explanation of what missing time is, but now on this segment, I think we're going to talk about the causes, because if you have a geological record, right, you have basically a schematic of what has happened and what is happening at the moment, right?
Yep.
So you have this whole diagram of everything there, right? But what you don't have is like a monumental mile or 2 miles high surface of ice, right? That could get hit by a meteor and melt, and then nothing is affected in the
Oh, well, you're getting into younger Dryas stuff.
I'm
right
younger.
here.
Yeah, I'm getting into younger Dryas. I'm getting into snowball Earth.
Yeah,
stuff,
I'd like
too.
to go back a little bit further. We were talking about the great unconformity in North America, that like 1.2 billion years that are missing at the base of the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
And we started talking about multiple hypotheses and explanations, and with that one, because it coincides with snowball Earth, which is essentially this theoretical period of time where the ice caps extended all the way. If you're an extreme snowball Earth theorist, then you think they extended close to the equator.
So snowball Earth, like a theory or hypothesis, or what?
It's a theory. We know there was massive glaciation.
All right.
I guess, like Conley's telling, like, if it's a theory, right? It's not a scientific theory. Like, it's an idea. You were like more like that, or
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
backed up by evidence.
It's backed up by evidence.
Okay.
So, but basically, a period of time where there's prolonged glaciation. I think that's the most practical way of explaining it. If you watch a documentary like Ancient Aliens or something, if you can even call that a documentary, the people, a lot of people who talk about snowball Earth, they want you to think that the ice caps covered the Earth and it was completely coated in ice, which is probably not the case. But
Right.
in
But
any case,
a massive amount of the Earth
yeah.
was probably covered in ice at some point.
Yeah.
And we can prove that through evidence.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
therefore created the theory of the snowball Earth.
sure, yeah, and
Okay.
Glaciers leave behind really good distinctive evidence. Nothing else deposits sediment or erodes material like a glacier.
Yeah.
And we know a lot about glaciers because kind of the earliest studies of what we call geomorphology, studying the surface of forms on the Earth. Those scientists were studying glaciers in like Switzerland and the Alps.
And the lakes formed by receding glaciers also have very unique characteristics.
Yeah, like the Great Lakes, the very unique. So we can easily identify glacial features in the rock record. Just that's the gist of that. But where the kind of hypothesis as far as the great unconformity comes into play is this idea that since the snowball Earth coincides with the great unconformity, that glaciation somehow had a big impact on the missing time that we have there. Because glaciers are so effective at eroding, basically physically and chemically breaking down older rock and transporting it away, that they were responsible for that missing time, or at least in part responsible.
Interesting. Okay.
So that goes back to your question about the different types of unconformities and how they form. Erosion is a big one. And we know that for certain because we can see it happening in real time. It's not necessarily always a prolonged process. For example, when a river floods, like the Rio Grande, if it were to flood, it can, in just a matter of hours, change the entire shape of the river channel, the floodplain,
The flora and fauna.
the biology.
Yeah.
And in some cases, rivers can completely change the direction that they're flowing through erosion and flooding. And when all is said and done, you can see that affecting the shape or the morphology of the channel itself. So we know that can happen on a really short time scale. When we look into the rock record, we can see ancient river channels. They're pretty obvious. You have basically a channel-shaped body of rock that has a scour at its base.
Yeah.
An erosional surface, okay, which tells us that river cut down through the older sediment, deposited sediment within it, and then changed its position.
So what causes that?
It's just normal river
Just
processing.
regular change, right?
That's that's exactly the process, like the features that we see here on Earth, we see on Mars. And that's how we know that Mars had rivers and water beds and lakes like that. This exact same features that
that's
we
a
see
good
on
point.
Earth. We see that on
So
Mars.
we're kind of seeing, when we're looking at Mars, we're kind of seeing our own past happen as well.
Yeah, and the reason we can see that in Mars, it is very obvious. Those things are the erosion is not happening on Mars. So what we are seeing, these things have happened 1 billion years ago, and since there's no erosion anymore because it doesn't have an atmosphere, it's not very geologically active and stuff. So those are left behind, and we are seeing that what has happened in Mars and those river beds and stuff like that, and it looks exactly like what we see on Earth, and that's how we know that Mars had water and flowing rivers. And
So we have some correlation there.
absolutely,
Yeah.
And we can use that in our scientific research, and we can create new hypotheses, which will eventually turn into theories, right?
Well, the discovery of those river channel deposits on Mars completely changed our idea of the history of Mars, because it told us for certain that there was flowing water on Mars. And it's basic physics. It's basic mechanics. You know, we know what it takes to pick up big pieces of rock and move them. Wind doesn't do that. Only water and ice do that. So we know there was flowing water on Mars.
deep canyons like Grand Canyons and stuff like that, the same structure we see on Mars. So which is amazing.
Yeah, and now we know there were lakes and all sorts of other features too.
Yeah.
So going back to
And one thing before going back to missing time, like when you're, why is this so relevant for us when you talked about this? It's like, I want to I don't know if you mentioned this, is like, let's say when we say 80 million years is missing, right? To give a perspective on that, the hominid, the species of Homo, like where we come out of, right, is barely been around, if you push it, maybe 5 million years to the max.
Yeah.
So you can have an entire kind of a species evolving and us completely missing out on that.
yeah,
In that
yeah, many species.
Yeah.
You know, we've been around for 0.0000001% of
That's
all
a
of geologic
Homo
time.
sapien or Homo
Yeah, the
erectus.
hominin.
The football field
Oh
analogy.
yeah. You got to do the football field analogy.
do that.
So when I was a undergrad student at Sul Ross, I was sitting in my physical geology class, and my professor at the time had a really great analogy for geologic time. And this will kind of add some strength to what we're talking about here when it comes to missing time. But if you visualize all of geologic time as a football field, the first 100 yards and the first end zone basically comprise what we call the Precambrian. This is the time before most of our advanced multicellular organisms evolved. Before the groups that we know now as different plants and animals come about. Ancient time.
Single-celled.
Before that, we had some complex stuff towards the end, but all single-celled prokarya and eukarya. So that's the full 100 yards of the football field.
Wow.
The end zone is the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Okay, the Phanerozoic time, which Paleozoic is ancient life, Mesozoic is middle life, and Cenozoic is new life. So that is just the end zone. That is the entire time it took for fishes to evolve, for tetrapods, dinosaurs, mammals, everything, and us included.
Right.
Now, here's where the cool part of the analogy is. He said, this is my professor when I was a student, if you go to the very, very end of the end zone and you find the last blade of grass, the thickness of that blade of grass is basically the amount of time that we've been around.
Human beings.
Homo sapiens, which is pretty incredible.
The little grass. That's it.
Yeah.
Little blade.
The thickness of a blade of grass.
That's all that we have to discover from this whole entire football field.
And we forget, a majority of that, like the thickness of the blade, we didn't even know how to write or read or anything document anything in that part.
Yeah, which is crazy because when you think about it, like, like our consciousness kind of like started right there. So how many times have our consciousness evolved in that other time that we don't even know about, making the point that, okay, there's Mars out there that has similarities to us. Like, are we bouncing around? Like, there's so many mysteries.
Yeah.
There's a Pandora box full of goodies.
I kind of see where you're going at there, but so our human history we have a limited record of that, right?
Yeah.
But that's just, because there's periods where nothing was written. We don't have record, but we have stories that are passed on. We have a much more complete record of human history than we do the rest of ancient history.
Yeah.
So there aren't too many pieces missing from that puzzle, relatively speaking. But I like where y'all were going when talking about plants and animals. Mm-hmm. Okay, because that's where it really interests me. I'm a stratigrapher, so of course I'm interested in the missing physical layers of rock.
Yeah.
But what I always go back to, and I've probably said this 100 times on the show when we talk about evolutionary biology and all that sort of stuff. But to me, it's incredible to imagine. So we've everything that's living today, we know of, I think, less than 20% of the known species that are estimated to exist on Earth. Okay. So 87% of known species or of species that likely exist, we've never seen or recorded.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm right with that statistic, but
ballpark.
Yeah, ballpark. An incredible number of plants and animals that we still haven't discovered. And maybe Sean's listening and punching the wall or something because I'm totally off on that one. But if we take that and we extrapolate it to the past, billion and a half years that stuff's been around, how much is truly missing from that amount of time? And what I always tell my students is in my classes, if we go through the history of the Earth, is we talk about these evolutionary radiation events where there's a big extinction and what's left over starts evolving and branching out again.
Yeah.
And it's those periods of time where we get really weird stuff. Like you look at the Permian, Triassic, bunch of weird stuff showed up after that. After the Cretaceous, when the non-bird dinosaurs went extinct, we had these giant terrestrial birds. We had the megafauna, all sorts of weird stuff.
What were those giant terrestrial birds called?
Terror birds.
Terror birds?
Yeah. And if you look at some pictures of them, the name is appropriate. Yeah. Yeah. Terrestrial land dwelling birds. So of what we know, which is just a percent of a percent, is weird. There's weird stuff. So imagining what existed in time that's missing or that we haven't discovered yet is even more incredible to me, because you look at modern animals, for example, and we talked about this on a show maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago when we talked about the deep sea, the weird stuff that lives down in the deepest parts of the ocean that looks alien.
Yeah.
And this is a brief window of time, Right. We talked about how quickly, relatively speaking, things can evolve and change. We look at those weird things that are living down in the deep ocean and then expand that to a billion and a half years worth of time.
Yeah. Wow. That's just a completely new filing cabinet you're opening. Yeah.
Because some of the animals which have evolved in the deep seas has never... that's the kind of like one of the undisturbed kind of segments of Earth, right, down there, and they have been there forever. So, which is pretty cool. You get to study that, and you look at
and that's really the only opportunity we have, because unfortunately, when it comes to the fossil record, we don't have great preservation. It's probably one of the worst ways of preserving fossils are things that live out in the deep part of the ocean.
Right.
Because there's not a huge amount of deposition happening there. If one of those weird anglerfish things dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, it's going to be broken down by bacteria. It's going to be picked clean by other fish. It's not going to be buried. It's just going to disappear from time.
Because every little morsel of a nutrient, whatever you there in deep sea, it's get eaten up. It's consumed. It's not wasted at all.
There's no time. It's not buried over quickly, so it's not going to be preserved.
Yeah.
So you look at the amount of time that the animals have been living in the oceans, millions and millions of years, and those are all gone. They're lost to time because they weren't preserved.
But even if we can kind of gaze upon the physical evidence that these beings were here at one point, or even not, with the underwater kind of species that are there that are not there now, right? We still don't. I mean, that just gives us a fraction of the full information that we could even possibly imagine, right?
Yeah, but we piece it together. That's what we do. You look. So kind of our framework for all of this is what we call the geologic time scale, or the International Stratigraphic Chart. If you look at when it was first being constructed, it was divided into a dozen different sections of time. You look at it now, and it looks like a rainbow of colors because each one of these colors represents a different division of time. But it's subdivided more and more and more, and we understand more about it and piece it more together as scientists continue to discover things.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So the rainbow is really just our imagination coming to fruition through evidence and our own research.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's actually really systematic. There's not much imagination involved. Well,
it has to start with imagination. We just discussed.
Well, curiosity. It has to start with the events that happen. That's where the imagination comes.
Well, when you come into a hypothesis, you have to imagine what could probably happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but the International Stratigraphic Chart, which is the more official sounding name for the geologic timescale, is the divisions are reviewed and accepted by the International Commission on Stratigraphy.
Wow, they sound so real.
Yeah. So these people do not have imagination. These are the guys with their tweed jackets and pipes and. That's probably not the case. But
they're waiting for Thomas to come up with a new kind of division and them wanting to shoot it down.
Yeah.
So this is stupid.
Yeah,
no.
That's their job. No, that's not.
So it's so official. It's so official. All right. Well, you know what? Okay, I'm going to throw a wrench into things. After the break, I got a question to pose to you that will kind of ignite more questions about missing time. And we'll have that question right after a quick commercial break.
Metallica.
All right.
Sorry, we were talking about Metallica.
Shiller, talking about Metallica over here, but we are back. We are back with the Science Nights in the Morning. Dr. Anirban Bhattacharjee here in the studio with us, astronomer extraordinaire, and we have geologist / paleontologist, one of the best minds as far as I'm concerned. I can say that. I can say very, very highly regarded academic in Thomas Shiller.
No one knows
when we're talking about geology and all this stuff. So we've been talking about missing time today, and before the break, I was going to pose a question to you, and I do have a question. So we were talking about missing time and all the things that we miss in small segments of history, even up to how many millions of years?
Like 1.2 billion, I think.
Billion?
Billion.
Billion.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're talking billions of years. Now I'm going to bring it, fast forward it to current times. And there was a recent release saying OpenAI's top researchers made a startling claim this week that artificial intelligence may have already gained consciousness. Now, that is pretty interesting to me. I'm in the computer science kind of world. And like any kind of being, you were talking about extinct, animals and everything. But any kind of being that can achieve consciousness, I mean, that's a pretty big thing. And that's something that we're constantly exploring and looking out into the future on. So when we're talking about looking and peering into the future, how are we going to prevent this time from missing? Is it possible?
No.
Okay. All
No,
right.
we can-
All right. We'll see.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But you get my question.
I do, and I think both on a long geologic scale, the answer is no, and I think on a shorter human scale, the answer is no. And
So our only evidence is the ground we walk.
even that's not going to be evidence.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess
Because
so.
the ground we're walking on here in Alpine is
Eroding
in the
every
interior.
day.
It's eroding every day. So
Yeah.
the hills around us are going to be gone in just a short time, and there'll be oceans that extend across the continent, I'm sure, at some point in time in the future that will deposit and bury that surface. And
AI reaching consciousness and taking over the world and
That'll
extincting
happen, yeah.
mankind.
Skynet.
yeah, Skynet will happen.
No, this is kind of like interesting question, but I think what Conley is telling is that 1.2 billion years, right? That is missing.
Yeah.
Are you hinting that was there a previous civilization like that was missing in that time? So the idea was like what I think Thomas is saying here is that 1.2 billion years that is missing from that area, right?
Yeah.
It's not missing somewhere in India or maybe in Japan.
Yeah, we have a record there.
Right, just an area.
Yeah. So if we had a huge civilization, which around that time, it would need to be only localized at that particular spot for it to be completely missing and not spread out. And if you think it's a I don't know. I mean, if it's like a really advanced civilization, why wouldn't they spread out? We have spread out, so we would have evidence of some kind somewhere on Earth.
Yeah.
So that's what makes me skeptical to feel that that there wasn't like a.
But it's
Unless
not-
if civilization didn't want to be spread out, Atlantis.
So you want like this is like a Om Shiryo cult in Japan?
No,
Just like-
all I'm saying is that there is a tremendous expanse of wonder out there is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that, when you get down to the root of it is you have to appreciate every single moment that you're here. And that's really what you're doing from an academic standpoint when you're studying this missing time and trying to piece everything together. So we have another about 10 minutes, not quite 10 minutes right now, but maybe instead of expanding on what we've done to discover this missing time, expand on what we're doing in the future. What do you think?
Well, I think the current MO is the best method, at least in my point of view.
But do you see any cycles that we can run ourselves into to where we're just repeating the same process over and over?
How do you mean in terms of how we're investigating
Academically,
time?
like our academic disciplines, because we were talking before about how, you went into all the officials and all this stuff, right? Well, when is it going to stop being pseudoscience and start being real science?
Well, you have to make discoveries that support whatever hypothesis it is you have, and that's the natural process of what we do. And it takes time. It takes exploring and discovering new places, and collecting and gathering that knowledge and sharing it with people. So that's like the goal of our academic pursuit. Is to expand upon what we know about, in my case, Earth's history. And you have to find more pieces of the puzzle, just plain and simple. And that, on my scale, we're talking millions of years. We're talking about when the dinosaurs were around and all that. But people who study human civilizations, they're looking at a shorter time scale. They have a better record in a lot of cases.
Right.
And they're doing the same thing. But it's all very systematic is the thing. There's some people out there, like in the realm of pseudoscience, who just kind of imagine something. Like there's a lot of that surrounding Atlantis and things like that.
Sure.
Bigfoot and everything.
Yeah.
It's like they're basically playing make believe. It's like, ooh, wouldn't this be cool if that existed? And there's no process to that.
Right.
You can explore it, And there are plenty of people out there exploring the possibility of Atlantis existing. It's not outside the realm of possibilities. We've talked about that in a previous episode.
Sure.
But you need the evidence. You need to find it. And like Anirban was saying,
Connecting the dots.
Yeah, like Anirban was saying, if you had this advanced civilization, which may have been advanced for the time, maybe not with flying cars and stuff
Solar
like that.
power and nuclear power.
Yeah,
But maybe just like, education, written documentation. stuff like
sure.
that.
You gotta find the evidence of them, and just from our knowledge of human civilization, when groups become that advanced, they spread out. They populate other places. Usually, they do so violently.
I just like it how we both went and said violently.
Yeah, that's
Well, that's the easiest thing, man. I mean, we're throwing rocks at each other right now.
We forget that nowadays, like everybody seems to think life was kumbaya. It was never ever that.
It's all chaos.
All violent chaos.
Yeah, violent chaos.
Yeah, this is kind of the first period of human history where we can resolve some things.
By talking.
Yeah, diplomatically.
Yes.
And that's still kind of rare.
Yeah.
Even with our country,
Yeah, right.
So, but anyway, I kind of like where you're going, Conley, with the idea of the future, because with what I do, I'm always looking into the past. I'm always thinking about what has happened and not what's going to happen. But ultimately, when you do that, you have to start thinking about the future of humanity and of the earth and everything. And I've thought about this a little bit. You think about other human civilizations, some of which have had written record, older ones that didn't, but we have physical evidence of their presence and all that. And we think of our presence here and what our version of the written record is. And we're not
like
printing
not
a lot
even
of books anymore. We're getting all of our
in the cloud.
It's all out there in the ether, right?
Yeah.
It's all preserved on devices and servers. And what my big question is whether or not our record, in terms of our modern civilization, is going to be preserved at all.
I mean, we have a library of Alexandria, like times a billion, like to the billionth.
Yeah.
Like right now, in where we're at right now. So is there any technology being pursued to preserve this that you know of? Anybody?
I don't know.
I mean, those, the time capsules, I guess, but, we don't know. I mean, we don't know. They're putting the capsules, digging them in deep down. But what happens, there is like a huge asteroid hits us, and then just...
I got an answer for you,
so,
if you want an answer.
Okay, go ahead.
All of the anything that has ever been spoken has been turned into a wave, and those waves are constant and infinite in the universe.
Okay,
and hey, they're out there.
Yeah,
who can decipher them? I don't know, but they're out there.
It would be hard.
Well, the scary thing is aside from conversations that have been had and that sort of communicated knowledge, there's a wealth of knowledge that's constantly being expanded upon through the scientific process that is all on digital
media.
Digital, So you think back like to the Dark Ages, right? Where most of human written knowledge disappeared and started from square one.
Yeah.
It's like all this stuff that we're working towards. What's going to happen if it goes away?
Boom.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to invent the cell phone again.
Yeah.
No, I could do without that.
So I was going to say, bringing it all back to missing time, and if I'm going to talk from astronomy, right, if I have to talk about that, how it, for us, we got help because we had nuclear reactors at least, where we could immediately study the nuclear fusion process and all those things. We could study it right here. It's like, oh yeah, this is how... elements, when you fuse them, they release energy. Cool. That's what's happening up in the stars. Awesome.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about different stars' age and stuff like that. So for us, that became much simpler when we understand nuclear fusion, at least for stars. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Now you know, everybody. The Pandora's box has been opened. We can't close it.
There's nothing inside.
There's nothing inside, literally.
There was something in there, but it's gone.
And now we got to figure it out.
It might come back.
That is what the Pandora's box really is our own curiosity to figure out the unknown, which is really boundless and endless in many ways. And I love that. And you know what? That's pretty cool. And let the journey continue on into the cosmos, as Carl Sagan would say. Okay. So anything else to wrap up with before we finish this live episode of Science Nights in the Morning?
You want to give us the phone number so that they can call us and ask questions?
Yeah. We need people to call in.
Call in.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, they can't call in right now, but normally it's 232-1987, and I'll have that on the outro too. So please visit us on Facebook, Science Nights in the Morning, KNIGHTS, and you can visit our Patreon and all that other stuff. You can listen to us live, local, and worldwide online at BigBenRadio.com every Saturday from 10 to 11 a.m. And I'm going to go ahead and get the outro. Thanks, y'all. Learned a lot today.
Rock on.
Rock on. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. You can also listen every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time at BigBenRadio.com. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K, and we'll see you next time.